I can kind of see where this dad is potentially coming from.
I think my son has additional needs, but my husband thinks I'm being dramatic. Catastrophizing was the word that he actually used. But I think he's in denial. I'm doing all the school meetings, all the advocating, all the research alone. He says I'm making problems that don't actually exist. We had a huge row and haven't properly spoken since. I think our marriage is at breaking point. So this is what one mum wrote on our forum. Obviously, Claire, you are founder of the Sen Expert. You are very much fully immersed in this world. What would your advice be to a mum who was finding herself like headbutting and trying to be heard?
Firstly, I think it's important to acknowledge that any kind of concern or worry is valid until you've delved into it a bit deeper. Shoving your head in the sand isn't going to solve the problem either way, because it's not going to suddenly mean that the child has got additional needs and you're going down a path of diagnosis or whatever. Also, it's also not going to make things go away. And I see this a lot, actually. I work with families through the SEN Expert. I also do parent coaching as well for situations like this, and for families when children have recently been diagnosed and they're trying to work out what that means for them. Not to talk ill of the male contingent of marriages, but it does seem to be the dads that find it harder to process what a life with additional needs can be. And it sounds, again, very cheesy, but the best way I found in those sessions when I'm talking to parents is through education. It's because he doesn't understand it, not because he doesn't believe the mum or think that he's saying that she's making it up, but that feels like a kind of defense mechanism. What I do in those sessions is, if someone is being particularly frosty or standoffish around a certain discussion around a level of need, I'll say, give me an example of, I don't know, what did you do at the weekend with little Jack? And they might say, I don't know, we went to football. And then I'll say, okay, what happened at football? So I'll get them to describe a situation and then ask them it sounds awful, but what kind of went wrong in that situation? And then from that physical example, I'm then able to unpick it and say, well, that sounds like, I don't know, you had to really shout at him, he wasn't listening to the football coach, you're screaming from the sidelines, you're getting really annoyed. That might not be because he's ignoring you because he's rude. It might be because he's got slow processing speed. And actually, he's heard the instruction, but it's taking him a bit longer to process it. But the ball's already gone past and the other team scored a goal and you're annoyed because you like football or something. So I try to take tangible examples and link them to a need as opposed to defiant behavior or something being seen as a negative. Like, all behavior, be it from adults or children, is a communication of some kind of need. So for the dear husband here, if your wife is telling you something that she's worried about, she's communicating something to you that needs to be discussed. If a child is behaving in a certain way, they too are communicating something that needs to be unpicked. And I think coming at it from that angle is far more easier to kind of get people on board who may not be as on board as they should be or could be. And I can kind of see where this dad is potentially coming from, because there is an awful lot of noise in social media around special educational needs, and there's also an awful lot of negative noise as well, and people saying that children are making up the need of having ear defenders, for example, or that it's a trend to have ADHD. So he's existing in a world where that kind of information is probably being beamed to him through his phone or social media or whatever. Then he's coming home and then they say, oh look, of course you think they've got this, that, another, because you've seen this thing on Instagram or something. But I think linking it to tangible examples of experiences that have happened, you can go really far with kind of getting a conversation going, rather than just being like, no, we're not talking about it, that's it.
Yeah, because that would immediately shut it down, right? Whereas if you're almost putting their words back to them, like, you notice this, so this could mean this, it can kind of help. And you're right, not knowing is the scariest bit. All humans hate not knowing. That's what we're scared when we go to parties. We're scared because we don't know. I don't know about you, but if I'm going to a restaurant, I like to check what the parking's like and what the menu's like, because I like to be forearmed. What's it? Forearmed, forewarned. So I do completely understand that. There is probably that no knowledge makes you immediately go, no, it couldn't be that. So I do agree. I see that a lot. Also, I don't know about you, but I do have a lot of mum friends that have said their partner thinks that you're giving the child an excuse. He's just not listening. You're just giving him an excuse to get away with it. You're being too soft on him. And that's hard to hear, because like you say, I'm trying to communicate with you that I'm concerned, that I think I've noticed this, I've noticed that, I've been doing the research. Oh, Instagram isn't research, but it is. We have experts like you. We have experts that are coming to us through our phones that are helping with information.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important for, if you are having those kind of situations where they're saying, oh, well, you're just making an excuse for XYZ behavior, the fact that behavior exists is the crux of the issue, right? Approaching conversations that way around. Also, sometimes being in a couple or being in married is a really kind of intense situation, and the only other person you talk to about problems is your partner. So having someone, I don't know, like me on our parent support sessions, or the Senko at school, or even another parent who might have similar concerns about their child, talking to somebody else about it so they can be the voice as well, not to say like, oh, you know, your wife told me all this stuff and I think you're awful and you shouldn't say these type of things. More like, oh, I noticed that as well, actually. I noticed that Jack, the imaginary boy at football, also doesn't listen to the football coach. That's interesting. I've noticed it. What do you reckon about that? So making yourself a little village as opposed to just being a couple trying to navigate an issue, because if you're just two of you and one of you decides they're up for a chat, then that's kind of the end of it, really.
Yeah, exactly, because I'm thinking of this mum and how lonely she must feel in all this information she's finding and this concern that she's got, and the one person that she's turning to try and get some kind of backing is shutting it down through fear, through not knowing, through any of that. So yeah, that's a really good call.
I wonder how, I talked about this in our parent support sessions, I wonder how much parenting each member of that marriage, husband, wife, actually does. It tends to be that mums take on more, and I know that's not a very modern way of looking at things, and it's certainly way more kind of level pegging than it was when we were kids, for example. But I wonder if she just spends more time with the child, so she sees more, and then when dad is seeing stuff, it might be at the weekends when they're doing activities that the child really enjoys or wants to do, or doing the fun bits as opposed to get your shoes on and go to school, or I don't know, do your homework or something. So it'd be interesting to know the kind of the split in responsibility, if that makes sense.
No, that does make total sense.
I don't know, if you're a stay-at-home mum, and I know not many people are stay-at-home mums now because everyone has to work, but think of how many hours of parenting that is versus the dad coming home at the end of the day. Or I might be completely wrong and it might be completely 50-50 split, and dad doesn't open to those conversations. So use other people to be your kind of, I don't know how to say it without sounding cheesy, almost be like the microphone for your issues, but it comes through somebody else.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I think you use the word village as well, which is quite nice, because when you're advocating for somebody else, it is nice to have that backup of someone else going, yes, I've noticed that. So like you say, it's not saying finger jab, you're wrong to the partner. It's just, oh yeah, no, I noticed that too, and kind of putting it out there a bit more. I can imagine this would be happening in a lot of families.
I think as well, the way that we live our lives now is different to how it was when we were growing up. So the word village, I literally grew up in a village. So there was probably about 20 odd parents in that village who saw me every day going to school, in the shop, I don't know, in the park or whatever, who could give an opinion about something that I did to one of my parents that would be completely genuine and valid because they know who I am as a person. Whereas now we live and far more kind of isolated parenting scenarios, whereas I don't have 20 other parents that I would say knew my children really well, because I live in London, so we walk past people and smile at them, but there isn't like, oh look, there's Jack's mum and I'm cousins with his grand, I don't know, you know what I mean? That kind of village feel. So you need to try and make links with people that you trust so that you can build that community around you, because it's really hard parenting when it's just two parents, because it's impossible to kind of manage all of just the day-to-day tasks and then potentially the stresses of possible additional needs as well.
Yeah, and spotting them and researching them and advocating for them and all of the mental load that goes with that as well. If you were going to sum up for this mum, like the top 3 things that she could do if she finds herself in this lonely situation of not being heard, what would you say from your experience as being a parenting coach?
So I would really focus on that sort of tangible example of a behaviour. Again, like with the previous parent, we talked about that idea of watchful waiting. So it might be that you're out and about and something happens, and then you're using it as an example to frame a discussion later on. I think our child did this because of this potential additional need, as opposed to them just being defiant or they're just not listening or whatever. My second bit of advice would be to think about how you can build a community around you that can be a support to the mum as well as a support to the child and the dad. So build relationships with people that you trust, so they can also be the ones that are saying like, oh, well, I took little Jack to the cinema yesterday and actually this happened and it made me think of XYZ. And also you really need to acknowledge the fact that the dad is probably shutting it down because they're worried or scared. They don't want anything to be different, or not wrong, but different or unusual about their child that's going to make them different from their friends' kids. So it's probably coming from a place of fear as opposed to a place of like true critique of the mum's parenting. So yeah, build a village around you so more people can tell him that he's wrong.
Because you said that as well, that last bit, correct me if I am wrong with this, but if your child does have additional needs such as autism or ADHD, that is linked to the parents in some way.
It can be. So there are cases where environmental factors have an impact on ADHD or autism, for example, or a whole range of special educational needs. But it tends to be that there is some kind of genetic link. And also, that's a really good point that you raised, actually. It might be that the dad is worried because it's a reflection on himself. There are so many parents that I work with now that have gone down the late diagnosis route because they were going through the SEN journey for their child, trying to navigate to get them extra support at school or something. And they said, actually, this feels very much like what happened to me when I was at school. I'm going to go and sort of research for myself. So it may be coming from a place of worry for the dad from that angle, that actually he's sort of seeing a reflection of his own childhood, maybe in his son, daughter, and is worried that, maybe it's because he has or had challenges that weren't addressed, and then, it's kind of going down the generational line, if that's how you put it. But yeah, late diagnosis is huge, and so many parents find it because they're going through the processes for their own children. They're like, oh, that's like when I was at school and that happened to me, and blah, blah, blah. And because the system then was less supportive, they just kind of battled on through and had these needs unmet, which can cause stuff to be more tricky later on in life.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that. Just got labelled the naughty kid or the loud kid, or and had to just kind of muddle through with it.
Yeah, definitely.
I've been Steph Lowe for Netmums, and that was Claire Walley, our expert on this week's Forum Friday. If you've got a dilemma, drop it below and it could be next week's episode. Tune in next Friday.